So you want to play Fire Mage in World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth 8.2? Well, this is the guide for you. In this guide, we're going to be covering all you need to know about playing Fire Mage in PvE. We'll start off with a quick summary of builds and talents, followed by Azerite traits and essences, then touch on rotations and cooldowns, and finally, a couple of tips for raiding a Mythic Plus. But why should you listen to me? I currently raid at Mythic level with my Fire Mage as my main, and have done since the start of Legion. Fire Mage is a great spec to play, it's fast paced, with a very reactive gameplay and good movement abilities. In the current patch 8.2, it's highly competitive and passing very well without much changes needed for most raid, single target or AoE fights. What better place to start than the abilities available to a Fire Mage? To begin with, we've got a wide range of damaging, AoE, single target, defensive and utility abilities available to you. You need to be familiar with the entire kit, however, most of the spec revolves around a few key abilities. For single target damage, Fire Mages have 4 key abilities. First up is Fireball. This is your standard filler spell, which you're primarily going to be casting when nothing with a higher priority is available, and to generate heating up procs. Pyroblast is the big hitter of the spec. This has a very long cast time, however, with our heating up passive, it can become instant cast. Fireblast is an off the global cooldown instant cast ability that always critical strikes. That is absolutely imperative to time right and use whenever you've got heating up to get a hot streak proc ready for an instant cast spell. Finally, for single target, you have Scorch. Scorch is a quick cast time ability that doesn't deal that much damage, but can be cast while you're moving. Very important if there's ever mechanics in the way of your damage. The AoE abilities for Fire Mage are a little more limited, but that's because of one of our passives which we'll touch on next. But in terms of hard casts, you've got 2 main AoE spells. Dragon's Breath, which deals a small amount of fire damage to all the targets in front of you in a small range, and also disorientates them for 4 seconds. You won't need to use this that often unless you talent for it. You also have Flame Strike. This is a cast on cursor ability that deals a big pillar of fire. It has a long cast time, but also benefits from Hot Streak for instant cast spells. Fire Mages aren't all about damage though. There is some utility in cooldowns that we need to think about for defensive aspects. First up is Arcane Intellect, a group and raid buff that buffs everyone's intellect by 10% for 1 hour. You just always want to have that up. On the defensive side, you've got Blazing Barrier. This is a shield, which again is instant cast and causes melee attackers to take damage. In Raid and Mythic Plus environments, the damage isn't that important, but while you're leveling or soloing, every little helps. Predominantly, you'll be casting this for the shield though to prevent damage and prevent your cast time being interrupted. Your final defensive abilities are Frost Nova and Ice Block. Frost Nova blasts all enemies within 12 yards of you for a tiny bit of frost damage, but more importantly, freezes them in place for 8 seconds. Ice Block is a 4-minute cooldown spell which prevents you from taking any damage, removes most debuffs, and can be cancelled with a macro. Make sure you have this on your toolbars because it's essential for certain raid mechanics. For your cooldowns, there's one main cooldown that you've got as a Fire Mage, and that is Combustion. It's got a 2-minute cooldown, and while it's active, you get mastery equal to 50% of your critical strike, and also increase your critical strike chance to 100%. It's castable while casting other spells, and is your main cooldown and the main damage component of being a Fire Mage. What really makes a Fire Mage special isn't necessarily our cast abilities though. We have a couple of passives that are very important. Firstly, Critical Mass. This increases our critical strike chance by 15%, and you gain 10% more of the critical strike stat from all sources. For a crit based build, this is pretty important. The signature piece of the Fire Mage's kit though is Hot Streak. When you get 2 direct damage critical strikes in a row, your next Pyroblast or Flame Strike will be instant cast and cause double the normal ignite damage. Speaking of ignite, that's our mastery. A target burns for additional damage based on all of the direct damage you deal with Fireball, Fireblast, Scorch, Pyroblast, Meteor and Flame Strike. If the effect is reapplied, any remaining damage will be added to the new ignite. If we ever talk about ignite chaining, this is what we mean. Lastly, as a Fire Mage, you have a few utility abilities. Firstly, invisibility. It's a 5-minute cooldown, makes you invisible and untargetable by enemies. To be honest, you'll only use it if you get stuck in combat. Finally, Polymorph is a spell you can use for crowd control. In Mythic Plus dungeons, it can sometimes be useful, but again, not something you'll use that often in PvE content. Fire mages have a range of talents that are viable in the current patch. That's great news for customizing your playstyle for different encounters. Bad news though, if you want to keep swapping them for optimal damage. Let's start by looking at this row by row. Row 1, you have 3 key abilities. Firestarter, which increases your critical strike chance of Fireball and Pyroblast spells when a target is above 90% health to 100%. Pyromaniac, which gives you a chance after casting Pyroblast or Flame Strike while Hot Streak is active to instantly reactivate Hot Streak. And finally, Searing Touch. It causes Scorch to deal 150% increased damage, always critical strike, when the target is below 30% health. So when would you use these talents? Pyromaniac, I would not advise ever. With the way that you chain hot streaks, it's pretty difficult to use that extra 8% effectively, and the other 2 talents in this tier are just a lot better. Your default option is going to be Searing Touch. Making Scorch deal 150% damage and always critical strike below 30% health gives you an execute phase. It also allows you to get better ignites, more hot streaks, and not be restricted with movement during that phase of boss encounters. Firestarter, which gives you a 100% chance to critical strike when your target is above 90% health, is mainly useful for leveling or in any fight where the target is going to be above 90% health for a disproportionate amount of the time. In the level 30 row of talents, there's 3 options, but to be honest, you're only ever going to pick one, and that's Shimmer. It replaces Blink, makes it castable while casting, and also gives you 2 charges. Don't ever bother with the other 2, there's no point in PvE, you're going to want to take them. The third row of talents is one of the most interesting for all the mage specs, and the same for all 3 mage specs. Which one you pick is going to depend a little bit on your playstyle, how complex you want to make the spec, and really what gives you a good feel. First up is Rune of Power. This is on paper the highest damage increase you're going to get. If you time it with things like your cooldowns, it's a big burst of damage. It does make you a little bit immobile, it is something that you have to actively use, but it's the best one you've got. Mirror Image is again another cooldown which causes 3 copies of your character to start casting spells and attack your enemies. It's easy to use, it's on a 2-minute cooldown. If you're leveling, it's a good option, but in most cases it's overpowered by Rune of Power. The final choice on the level 45 row is Incanter's Flow. Incanter's Flow is a bit of an interesting one because it increases your damage all the time, scaling up from 4% to 20%, cycling every 20 seconds up and down. It's passive, which means that it doesn't alter your playstyle, and on paper it doesn't do that much worse than Rune of Power. However, where Rune of Power wins out is that you can get that 40% damage buff when you want it, and that is during your cooldowns. Row 4 of the talents gives us ways to generate more critical strikes and more hot streak buffs. First up is Flame On. This reduces the cooldown of Fire Blast by 2 seconds and increases its maximum charges by 1, taking it to a total of 3. Alexstrasza's Fury is the middle choice. This means Dragon's Breath always critical strikes and also now contributes to Hot Streak. Finally, Phoenix Flames. This holds a phoenix that deals damage to the target and splashes fire damage to other nearby enemies, and it always critically strikes. It has 3 charges and a 30-second recharge. In this tier, you're probably always going to be wanting to take Flame On, as Fire Blast is the simplest to use and also gives you an extra charge and more Fire Blast during combustion. It's a great choice. Dragon's Breath isn't something you're often going to be buffing. Yes, having it contribute to Hot Streak is useful, but unless you're in a very niche situation where you need big bursts of AoE for 5+ targets, you're not going to want it. Phoenix Flames can potentially be useful for Mythic Plus fights when you're dealing with lots of trash or fights with a lot of additional ad waves, but in practice you'll probably find the Flame On is just always going to be a choice here unless you really have a situation where Phoenix Flames is going to be useful. On the level 75 row, there's really only one option, and that's Frenetic Speed. This causes your Scorch ability to increase your movement speed by 30% for 3 seconds. Ice Ward and Ring of Frost, read the descriptions yourself, but just never take them. The level 90 row of talents has 3 viable options. Confragulation is going to be the spell and talent that you use most often. It's passive, it's best for single target, it basically just makes Confragulation and Ignite deal more damage, and it can flare up and deal damage to nearby enemies. It's passive AoE. Flame Patch can be good, however, it's the best talent in Mythic Plus dungeons if you're constantly going to be fighting 3 to 12 targets as long as the targets remain inside a Flame Patch. For that reason, it's not that often used, although depending on some Mythic Plus affixes, it could be useful. Living Bomb is a really cool ability. It puts a bomb in the target that deals fire damage over 3 seconds and then explodes to deal bonus fire damage to all other enemies within 10 yards. This is the best talent on this row if you are fighting 12 plus targets. However, in 8.2 and BFA in general, I can't think of a time when I've really needed to use this. 9 out of 10 times, Confragulation is going to be your choice on this row. The final row of talents for Fire Mage are the big hitters. First up, your most common choice is going to be Meteor. This is a 45-second cooldown that cools down a meteor that deals a heck of a lot of damage, split evenly between all enemies within 8 yards, and then causes a burning patch of ground. For single target, it's your best choice, as long as the meteor will always hit the target. It's also the best choice for AoE, as long as the targets stay within the flame patch on the ground. Next up, you've got Pyroclasm. This is copied off the Legion legendary effect. After consuming Hot Streak, there's a chance that your next non-instant cast Pyroblast within 15 seconds will deal over double normal damage. In reality, it's a bit harder to use than Meteor, it's a bit of a pain and doesn't sim as well, so take Meteor over that. Finally, you have Kindling. This is a passive ability, which makes it a bit easier to use, but it's a bit lackluster. It essentially causes the majority of your abilities to reduce the cooldown of combustion by a second. Again, in most fights, this is never going to be useful. Potentially, the only time you'd use this is in situations where you could sneak in an extra combustion on a certain raid mechanic, or you can't keep everything within your Meteor, etc. But, as I said, Meteor is going to be your primary choice on this talent. Moving on to essences within the Heart of Azeroth. The new essence system added with 8.2 gives us a range of options of what we can do to boost our damage as a Fire Mage. There's a couple of options, but let's look at the major talent first. So, your major essence is the one where you get both the major active effect and minor passive effect. There's two real outliers here in terms of what you want to be picking for most situations. Memory of the Lucid Dreams, which major causes your Fire Blast to recharge at 100% faster rate. That means that during combustion, you're going to be just spamming Fire Blast and Pyroblast until the cows come home. However, there are a few other choices to be made here. Predominantly, Condensed Life Force rank 3. This is what you get from the Eternal Palace, and its major ability summons a Guardian on a 3-minute cooldown that deals a lot of damage for you. On pure single target fights, this is a very effective ability. However, while it does sim higher, it does change your combustion playstyle quite a bit, and in any situation where it's not pure single target, Memory of the Lucid Dreams wins out. For your minor slot, there's a couple of choices as well, depending on what you took on your major. If you've taken Condensed Life Force as your major, you always want Memory of the Lucid Dreams in your minor slot for the minor effect of giving you additional Fire Blasts. If you've got Lucid Dreams as your major, you'll probably want rank 3 of the Crucible of Flame. That again is the one you get just from leveling up your Heart of Azeroth. It's a good choice in your second minor slot. If any of you want to sim this though, it's a good idea depending on which essences you have. One word of warning though, on the World Vein Resonance, the minor effect of this in raid bots tends to be over-simmed. And the reason for that is it assumes that 5 allies are going to be using it as well. Unless you have 5 other people in your raid or party who are going to be using this minor essence, it's probably going to do worse than the Crucible of Flame. So just make sure you check that. For most situations with essences though, you're going to be wanting to run Lucid Dreams rank 3 as your major, and Crucible Flames as your minor. Potentially on single target, you can also run Condensed Life Force as your major and Lucid Dreams as your minor. For your second minor slot, when you unlock it, just run the sim. It'll probably change by then anyway. As a Fire Mage, you've got a couple of Azerite traits which you're going to be wanting to keep an eye out for. The first one is Blastmaster. This one does alter your playstyle, but what it does is for every time you cast Fire Blast, your mastery is increased for 3 seconds, and the effect stacks up to 3 times. The reason this is altering your playstyle is when you've got it, you're going to want to try and chain your Blastmaster stacks so that it keeps its maximum uptime, And if you've got Meteor talented, you're going to want to make sure that you cast Meteor when you've got 3 stacks. However, that 3 stacks needs to be activated when the Meteor is actually summoned, not at the point at which it actually is cast. So it's about half a second later or so. The next class-specific trait you're going to want to keep an eye out for as a Fire Mage is Wildfire. This causes your Pyroblast to deal additional damage, and when you activate Combustion, it gives bonus critical strike to up to 4 nearby allies. It's pretty good, it's good for your team, always look out for it. The last piece of Fire Mage Azerite tips I give you is one of the new Azerite traits that you can get with 8.2 is Undulating Tides. This is a bit of a red herring. When you're simming it, it shows that it is incredibly powerful. However, when you read it, you'll see that if your health drops below 50%, you get a shield, which you could argue is good because it means it may prevent you from dying, but it stops the damaging effect from working. So if you're progress raiding, maybe that shield's useful. However, if you're getting unavoidable damage or damage that you really should be avoiding quite often, then maybe this won't work as well as the sim says. In raid bots, there is an option though to check what uptime percentage you're showing this as having to get a more realistic sim. Leave your ego at the door and make sure you check it properly. Another good kind of inner tier Azerite trait is Gut Ripper. It usually sims the highest, it's highly effective. Other options as well are Overwhelming Power. It's pretty good, again in Mythic Plus and raiding environments you're not going to be taking damage, so certainly keep a lookout for this. But for all of these kind of inner tier traits, raid bots is going to be your option. Just sim it, because that will tell you what you really want to be going for. Base rotation for Fire Mage is simply casting Fireball until you get a heating up buff. You then cast another Fireball. While the Fireball is casting, you fire off a Fire Blast. That will give you Hot Streak. As soon as the Fireball finishes casting, you instant cast Pyroblast, and then start fishing for Hot Streaks all over again. Combustion is your big rotation as a Fire Mage, and I've got this going at 20% normal speed. So first off, you cast Memory of the Lucid Dreams. As soon as that cooldown's finished, you throw down a Rune of Power, and then you're going to start your Combustion phase with max damage. The second Rune of Power finishes, you start casting a Scorch due to its lower cast time. While Scorch is casting, you trigger Combustion. Immediately when that Scorch finishes, you hit Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, rinse and repeat. If you're running the Blastmaster proc, once you've got 3 stacks of Blastmaster, you then cast your Meteor on the target and continue with the Fire Blast and Meteor spam. That will then continue until Combustion finishes, and if for whatever reason your Fire Blast is on cooldown during that Combustion window, you just cast Scorch as a filler. The reason you use Scorch is because you're primarily fishing for the Hot Streak proc and you want the quicker cast time. As soon as your first Rune of Power is finished, you then immediately cast your second charge of Rune of Power and carry on your rotation as normal. Your AoE rotation as a Fire Mage doesn't really change much. If there's 3+ targets and you're using Flame Patch, you use your AoE rotation, otherwise 5+ targets. Essentially, you still just cast Fireball in order to fish for a Hot Streak proc, use Fire Blast to get it into a Hot Streak rather than just a heating up, and then rather than casting a Pyroblast, you simply cast Flame Strike. And that's it! So, that covers the basics of Fire Mage. While we do a little outro, I'll go through a full normal pool timer just so you've got an idea of what you should be doing in a boss fight situation. But essentially, you cast your pots and everything like that at 3, you start a Fireball at about just under 2 seconds. As soon as that goes off, you pop your Lucid Dreams if you're running that, throw down a Rune of Power, go into your normal Combustion phase, and then just party like it's 1999. But yeah, the big things of Fire Mage right now, they're pretty competitive. Probably your biggest choices you're going to be making in a raid is whether you want to run Lucid Dreams rank 3 as your major or Condensed Life Force rank 3 as your major. Before rank 3 Condensed Life Force, always go with Lucid Dreams, it's better. When you get rank 3 Condensed Life Force, it's potentially a better play. I mean, in a sim it's good, but again, it just depends how you feel. It does make the Combustion phase a little more tricky. You have to throw in kind of some dancing with Scorches in there, with the Fire Blasts, and it's even more tricky if you've got Blaster Master. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, all in all, Fire Mage is doing pretty well. The nice thing is with the Ignite proc is you don't really have to worry about switching your talents around too much, even in Mythic Plus. It's only if you're going to be on a heavy ad week in Mythic Plus that you're going to have to worry about the trash and maybe go for Flame Patch, but otherwise your passive cleave is going to be beautiful. So in terms of pots, you're going to be wanting to run greater intellect always. Flasks, obviously greater intellect. Runes is normal. Your food, again, I'd sim it, but usually you're probably going to be looking at haste. You don't need to stack crit anymore on fire mages too badly. Talking of simming, raid bots is of course where you want to go for most of the decisions when it comes to what essences, what Azerite trades, what gear upgrades, what stats you want to be getting, because a sim is going to be better than anything I can do here. So if you want a guide on sims, there's a loadout. I'll be putting one out too, but that is always going to be your first protocol when you've got something which you're not sure if it's an upgrade or you're not sure it's going to be better. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, like the video. If you've got any questions, ask me in the comments section, or check out my Twitch stream on twitch.tv/Madals.